The house was silent, yet filled with pain. A simple woman hired only to clean taught 3 children to pray in silence and, without realizing it, touched a heart that believed itself unbreakable. That day, the most powerful man in the house discovered that love is not bought, it is grown. Before we begin, join our family here on the channel. Subscribe now, leave a like. It helps our work so much. And write in the comments which city you're watching from. I love knowing how far our stories reach. The private elevator ascended the 42 floors of the most imposing corporate building in New York City. Michael watched the city through the armored glass, but his eyes didn't see the movement on the streets. They didn't see the cars that looked like ants down below, nor the lights that were beginning to flicker on at the end of the afternoon. His eyes were lost in a much more distant place, a place where executive meetings and financial reports could not reach. His secretary had cancelled the last 3 appointments of the day. Michael decided to go home early, something that hadn't happened in months. In fact, since Caroline had passed, the house had become just a place he returned to when exhaustion overcame his resistance, a place where he slept for a few hours before diving back into the work that kept him functioning. The driver was already waiting for him in the building's garage. During the drive through the congested avenues of New York City, Michael tried to focus on the messages that incessantly arrived on his phone. International investors, strategic partnerships, decisions that moved millions. His tech company had become one of the most powerful in the world, with branches spread across 3 continents. At 41, Michael had achieved everything he had dreamed of when he was just a young programmer full of ambitions. Everything except what truly mattered. The automatic gate of the mansion in Greenwich opened slowly. The house, with its 12,000 square feet, impeccable gardens, and a pool that reflected the first stars of the night, looked like a perfect postcard of success. But Michael knew that behind that flawless facade was a void that no professional achievement could fill. He parked the car in the garage and walked towards the main entrance. Normally, at this hour, the sounds of the house would greet him like a familiar symphony. Gabriel, 8 years old, would always run to show him the drawings he had made at school. Lucas, 6 years old, would usually bombard him with questions about dinosaurs, cars, and anything that sparked his infinite curiosity. Peter, the youngest at 4, was generally involved in some mischief that made for funny stories at dinner time. But that afternoon, when Michael opened the door, he was greeted by something completely different. Silence. A silence so profound it was disturbing. There was no noise of toys being dragged across the marble floor, no children's voices echoing through the wide corridors, not even the sound of the television on in the living room. Michael frowned and placed his executive briefcase on the entryway console. His footsteps echoed through the main hall as he headed to the living room. The Italian leather armchairs were immaculate, the cushions perfectly aligned. No sign of the boy's usual presence. The toys were too organized, as if no one had played with them all day. A strange feeling began to form in Michael's chest. Since Caroline's death a year and a half ago, the house had undergone a gradual transformation, but it had never been this quiet. The boys always found a way to fill the empty spaces with their vibrant presence, even when the pain seemed greater than themselves. He climbed the marble stairs that led to the 2nd floor, where the children's rooms were. His steps echoed through the house like the ticking of a clock marking time painfully. The first room he checked was Gabriel's, the eldest. The bed was made, the books organized on the shelf, the school uniforms hung in the closet. But Gabriel wasn't there. In the next room, Lucas's, the same scene repeated. Everything in order, everything in its place, but no sign of the boy who used to turn that space into a laboratory for crazy experiments with his science toys. Michael's heart began to beat faster. Where were his sons? He went to Peter's room, the youngest. The door was ajar and he pushed it gently. Once again, he found only the organized emptiness of a room that seemed not to have been inhabited during the day. It was then that he heard it, a low murmur, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere in the house. Michael stopped in the hallway and strained his ears, trying to identify where the sound was coming from. It was a female voice speaking in a soft tone, but he couldn't make out the words. Following the sound, He went back down the stairs and through the gourmet kitchen to the utility area. The voice became clearer as he approached. It was a voice he didn't recognize, although he knew he should. In recent months, so many nannies and housekeepers had passed through the house that he had stopped trying to memorize names and faces. The door leading to the backyard was slightly open. Michael approached and, through the crack, saw a scene that left him completely paralyzed. There, in the small garden that Caroline had planned with so much care, were his 3 sons. Gabriel, Lucas, and Peter were kneeling on the green grass, forming a small circle. Their heads were bowed, their eyes closed, their small hands joined. And, next to them, also kneeling on the grass, was a woman Michael vaguely remembered seeing around the house in the last few days. She was a simple woman, appearing to be in her 50s, with brown hair tied in a discreet bun, wearing a navy blue uniform that had seen better days. In her hands she held a small rosary, and her lips moved in silent prayer. But what impressed Michael the most was not the image of the prayer itself. It was the expression on his sons' faces. Gabriel, who since his mother's death had become a boy too serious, for his age, had a tranquility on his face that Michael hadn't seen in months. His eyebrows were not furrowed as usual, and his shoulders did not carry the tension of someone who felt responsible for taking care of his younger brothers. Lucas, who had become a quiet and withdrawn child after losing Caroline, was present in a way that Michael had forgotten was possible. His small hands held his younger brother's hands tightly, and there was a serenity in his posture that contrasted with the constant restlessness he had shown in recent months. Peter, the youngest, who cried every night asking when Mommy would come back from heaven, was there with his eyes closed, breathing deeply, as if for a few moments he could find peace for his unanswered questions. And they were all connected by that female presence Michael barely knew. The woman who had been hired only to keep the house clean had become something much greater, much more significant. Michael stood motionless behind the door, watching that scene with a mixture of emotions he couldn't fully process. Part of him felt grateful to see his sons in a moment of peace. Another part felt guilty for not being the one providing that comfort. And there was a third, deeper part that felt threatened by witnessing an intimacy from which he had excluded himself. The woman's voice became a little more audible, and Michael managed to catch a few words. She wasn't reciting memorized prayers or following formal rituals. She was talking to God as one talks to a dear friend, mentioning each of the boys by name, asking for protection, health, and for them to find the strength to move forward. Lord, take care of Gabriel, who carries a weight too heavy for his 8 years, she said with a voice full of tenderness. Help Lucas find his voice again, so he can share what he feels, and embrace Peter, who still looks for his mommy in every corner of the house. Michael felt a pang in his chest upon hearing those words. That woman, whose name he wasn't even sure of, knew his sons in a way that he himself had lost. She saw beyond appearances, beyond external behaviors. She saw the deepest needs of each child. And give their father wisdom, the woman continued, so that he may find his way back to his children, even with so much pain in his heart. The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He stepped away from the door, leaned against the kitchen wall, and closed his eyes. When was the last time he had stopped to really talk to his sons? When was the last time he had sat on the floor to play with them or read a story before bed? When was the last time he had been truly present, not just physically? Since Caroline's death, Michael had convinced himself that working more, earning more money, ensuring the best education, and the greatest material security for his children was his way of showing love. He had hired the best doctors, child psychologists, private tutors. He had enrolled the boys in the most prestigious school in New York. He had bought them everything they asked for, and many things they didn't even know they wanted. But he had forgotten the most basic, the most essential thing. He had forgotten to be present. He had forgotten that his sons didn't need more things. They needed him. The sound of a chair being dragged in the kitchen brought him back to reality. Michael opened his eyes and saw the woman entering through the garden door, followed by the 3 boys. She stopped upon seeing him, slightly surprised. "Good afternoon, Mr. Michael," she said with a soft but firm voice. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you had arrived." The boys ran towards their father, but Michael noticed there was a difference in how they approached. It wasn't the usual rush, full of energy and demands for attention. It was a calmer, more centered approach. "Dad, you're home early today," said Gabriel with a genuine smile that Michael hadn't seen in weeks. Auntie Rose was teaching us how to talk to God, Peter explained with the typical sincerity of a 4-year-old. "Auntie Rose?" Michael asked, looking at the woman. "Rosemary, sir. Rosemary Evans," she replied, extending her hand respectfully. "I was hired last week to take care of the house cleaning." Michael shook her hand, noticing it was calloused, the hand of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. But there was something more to that woman, a presence that transcended her role in the house. "Dad, Auntie Rose made a chocolate cake," said Lucas, finally saying something spontaneous after weeks of monosyllabic answers. Michael looked at Rosemary with a question in his eyes. "I hope you don't mind, sir," she said. "The children seem to need something special today, and I always carry some basic ingredients with me." There was something in the way she spoke that conveyed a natural confidence. It wasn't subservience nor excessive intimacy. It was simply the presence of someone who knew exactly where she was and why she was there. "Can I see this cake?" Michael asked, surprising himself with his genuine interest. The boys led him to the kitchen island, where a simple but perfectly baked chocolate cake waited, on a platter. It was nothing elaborate, nothing that could compete with the French desserts the private chef used to prepare. But there was something about that cake that sparked a distant memory in Michael's mind. Caroline used to make simple cakes like this when they were newlyweds and still lived in the small apartment in Brooklyn. They were cakes made with basic ingredients, but seasoned with love and shared in moments of family intimacy that he had forgotten existed. "Can I try some?" Michael asked. Gabriel cut a generous piece and handed it to his father. Michael tasted it and felt the sweet, familiar flavor of homemade chocolate. It wasn't the imported Belgian chocolate he usually consumed. It was regular cocoa powder mixed with all-purpose flour and granulated sugar. But it had a taste of home that he hadn't felt in a long time. "It's delicious," he said, and realized he wasn't lying to please the children. He was being genuinely honest. "Auntie Rose said we can help make the next one," said Peter, his eyes shining with anticipation. Michael looked at Rosemary, who was watching the interaction with a discreet smile. There was something about her that intrigued him. It wasn't just her ability to cook or clean. It was the way she managed to create moments of normalcy in a house that had forgotten what normal was. "Rosemary," he said, "could you stay a few extra minutes today? I'd like to talk to you." "Of course, Mr. Michael," she replied. "I'll just finish tidying up the kitchen." While Rosemary organized the utensils she had used to make the cake, Michael watched his sons. They seemed different, not completely transformed, but definitely lighter. Gabriel didn't have that worried expression he constantly wore. Lucas was humming a song under his breath that Michael didn't recognize. Peter was drawing on a piece of paper, focused, but without the tension that usually accompanied his activities. "Boys," Michael said, "how about we go to the living room and watch a movie together?" The suggestion was met with enthusiasm, but a contained enthusiasm, as if they didn't want to break the peaceful mood that had settled in the house. As the children headed to the living room, Michael approached Rosemary. "Thank you," he said simply. "For the cake?" she asked with a modest smile. "For what you did for them today," Michael replied. "I don't know what it was, but I haven't seen my sons like this in weeks." Rosemary stopped drying her hands on the towel and looked directly at him. It was a serene but penetrating gaze. "Mr. Michael," she said, "your sons are special boys. They just need to know they're not alone." There was something in those words that resonated deeply within Michael, perhaps because he himself had felt alone for a long time, perhaps because he realized that in his quest to provide material security for his children, he had forgotten the emotional security they needed most. "Do you have children?" he asked. "I did," Rosemary replied, and something in her tone indicated a painful story behind that simple answer. Michael didn't press. He had learned that certain pains need to be respected in their own time and silence. "Well," he said, "I hope you can continue coming here. The boys seem comfortable with you." "It would be a pleasure, Mr. Michael," she replied. "If I may say so, they are children who just need presence. Someone who stays. Someone who won't leave when things get tough." Again, Rosemary's words hit Michael in an unexpected way. How many people had left his sons' lives in the past year and a half? How many nannies, housekeepers, even relatives who couldn't handle the children's pain and simply disappeared? "Good night, Rosemary," he said. "Good night, Mr. Michael. See you tomorrow." Michael walked her to the door and then went to the living room, where he found his 3 sons snuggled on the large sofa, waiting for him. Gabriel had chosen an animated movie that they could all watch together. For the first time in many months, Michael sat in the middle of his sons, letting Peter lean on his arm, Lucas settle in beside him, and Gabriel share the popcorn he had prepared. While they watched the movie, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the scene he had witnessed in the garden, his sons kneeling, praying with a woman they barely knew, but who had somehow managed to provide them with something that he, with all his money and resources, had not been able to offer. Peace. Simple and profound peace. When the movie ended and the children went to their rooms, Michael was left alone in the living room, reflecting on a day that had been different from all the others. Something had changed in that house. Something subtle but significant. And for the first time since Caroline's death, Michael allowed himself to believe that maybe there was a way back, a path that didn't involve professional achievements or material security, a path that involved presence, consistency, and someone who chose to stay even when things got tough. Rosemary Evans, a simple woman who had come to clean the house, but who was perhaps cleaning much more than just the rooms. Perhaps she was cleaning wounds that no amount of money in the world could heal. The next morning arrived with a different smell in the house. Michael came down to the kitchen earlier than usual, driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain. He found Rosemary already there, preparing breakfast for the children. It wasn't the elaborate breakfast the private cook used to serve on weekends. It was something simpler: toasted French bread, scrambled eggs, freshly squeezed orange juice, and fruit cut into fun shapes. "Good morning, Mr. Michael," Rosemary greeted, without interrupting what she was doing. "The children woke up asking to help with breakfast. I hope you don't mind." Michael looked around and saw Gabriel standing on a stool, carefully, scrambling eggs in a pan. Lucas was by the sink, washing the fruit that Peter was arranging in a colorful bowl. It was such a common, natural scene that for a moment Michael forgot he was in his own home. "Dad, look how I can scramble eggs," Gabriel said with genuine pride. "And I'm washing the apples just like Auntie Rose taught me," Lucas added, showing off each fruit as if it were a trophy. Peter ran to his father with a banana in his hand. "Daddy, do you want a banana? Auntie Rose said bananas give you strength for work." Michael sat at the kitchen island, watching his sons perform simple tasks with a concentration and joy he hadn't witnessed in a long time. There was something therapeutic in those basic gestures, in the way they helped each other, in the way Rosemary guided them without rush or irritation. "How long have you all been awake?" Michael asked. "Auntie Rose got here really early," Gabriel explained. "She said she wanted to finish tidying up before we woke up, but we came downstairs and asked to help." "They are very dedicated," Rosemary said with a smile, "and they have a thirst for learning. They just need someone with the patience to teach." Michael ate the breakfast prepared by his own sons, and again had that strange feeling of familiarity. The taste was simple, but it had a special seasoning that came from the care, the attention, the love involved in its preparation. After breakfast, the children went to the living room to play, and Michael took the opportunity to talk more with Rosemary. "May I ask where you're from?" he questioned. "Upstate New York, sir, a small town," she replied, continuing to wash the dishes. "I came to New York City a few years ago looking for work." "And your family, did they stay there?" Rosemary paused for a moment, her hands still in the sink water. "My mother still lives there. She takes care of the house that belonged to my husband." "Belonged?" Michael asked, immediately realizing he had touched on a sensitive subject. "He passed away 3 years ago," Rosemary said simply. "Cancer. It was very fast." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that pain, that sudden emptiness that settles in when the person you love is simply no longer there. "I'm sorry," he said, and his words carried a sincerity that came from his own experience with loss. "Thank you," Rosemary replied. "It was hard at first, especially because I left behind 2 children who were almost grown, but they understood that I needed to start over, away from the memories." "You have children?" Michael asked, surprised. "I do. Rachel, who is 22 and finishing her degree in education, and John, who is 20 and works at a mechanic shop in town. They're good kids." Michael fell silent, processing this information. Rosemary had left her own children to work caring for the children of others. She had left her hometown, her memories, her history, to rebuild her life in a metropolis where she was just one among millions. "It must be hard to be away from them," he said. "It is," Rosemary admitted. "But sometimes the pain of missing them is less than the pain of staying in a place where everything reminds you of the person who's gone. And besides, I discovered that caring is my calling. It doesn't matter who I care for. The love I give always comes back in some way." Rosemary's words echoed in Michael's mind for the rest of the day. Even at the office during executive meetings and international conference calls, he found himself thinking about the simplicity of this woman who had left everything behind to start over, and who now cared for his children as if they were her own. At the end of the afternoon, when he returned home, he was greeted by a scene that would become routine in the coming days. The children were in the garden with Rosemary, not just playing, but learning. Gabriel was planting lettuce seedlings in a small garden bed she had improvised. Lucas was observing an earthworm with a magnifying glass, fascinated by Rosemary's explanations about the importance of these small animals for the soil. Peter was drawing in a notebook, copying the flowers he saw around him. "Dad, look what I planted!" Gabriel shouted as soon as he saw Michael approach. "In a few weeks we'll be able to eat salad from our own garden," Lucas explained enthusiastically. "And I drew a rose just like the one in Grandma's garden," Peter said, showing a colorful drawing full of detail for a 4-year-old. Michael knelt in the middle of his sons, observing each discovery, each lesson, learned. There was so much knowledge being shared there, so naturally, so organically. "Auntie Rose knows a lot," Gabriel said. "She said her grandmother taught her all this when she was little. And that now she's teaching us, just like her grandma did," Lucas added. Michael looked at Rosemary, who was watching the interaction with that serene smile that was becoming familiar. "They learn quickly," she said, "and they have a natural curiosity that needs to be nurtured." That night, during dinner, Michael noticed how the dynamic of the house had subtly changed. The children talked more, shared their discoveries of the day, asked questions about the world around them. Rosemary had established small routines that brought structure without rigidity, care without suffocation. "Auntie Rose, can you teach us how to make bread tomorrow?" Peter asked. "If your father allows it," she replied, looking at Michael. "Of course," he said, "but you don't need to call me Mr. Michael all the time. You can just call me Michael." Rosemary smiled. "Thank you, Michael." There was something liberating in that simplicity, in that break from unnecessary formalities. Michael was beginning to understand that Rosemary was not just an employee. She was someone who had become part of their lives in an organic, natural way. After the children went to sleep, Michael and Rosemary sat on the porch, watching the garden illuminated by the outdoor lights. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Michael said. "Of course. Why do you do all this? Go beyond what you were hired to do." Rosemary was silent for a few moments, as if searching for the right words. "When my husband died," she said finally, "I felt completely lost. I didn't know who I was without him anymore. My children were already grown, independent. I felt useless, without purpose." She paused, looking at the stars beginning to appear in the sky. "I came to New York City thinking it would just be a professional fresh start. But when I started working in homes where there were children, I discovered that they gave me back something I thought I had lost forever, a sense of purpose, of importance. I discovered that my pain could be transformed into care for other people who were also suffering." Michael listened to every word attentively, recognizing in them echoes of his own feelings. "Your sons," Rosemary continued, "are going through the same thing I went through. They lost someone very important and are trying to understand how to keep living without that person. The difference is that they are too young to process it alone. And you know how to help them, because you went through the same thing, Michael concluded. Exactly, it's not pity or compassion, it's recognition. It's one pain talking to another pain and finding ways to heal. Michael felt a lump in his throat. For months he had been trying to find answers in child psychology books, in consultations with specialists, in therapists who charged fortunes, per hour. But a simple woman from upstate New York had managed in a few days to establish a genuine connection with his sons. "And how do you do it?" he asked. "How do you reach them in a way that I can't?" "Presence," Rosemary answered without hesitation. "True presence. It's not about being in the same room. It's about being emotionally available. It's looking them in the eyes when they speak. It's listening not just to the words, but to what they are trying to communicate behind the words." "I work a lot," Michael said, as if it were an excuse. "I know. And they know it too. But work isn't love, Michael. Success isn't love. Material security isn't love. Love is time. Love is attention. Love is choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave." Rosemary's words cut deep into Michael's heart. He knew she was right. He had convinced himself that by working more, achieving more, earning more, he was showing love for his sons. But in reality, he was just running away from the pain of having to deal with his own loss and the challenge of being emotionally present for the boys. "I don't know if I know how to do that," he admitted, "to be present in that way." "No one is born knowing," Rosemary said gently, "but it's possible to learn. Your sons are great teachers. They just need you to want to learn." In the following days, Michael began to implement small changes in his routine. He came home earlier at least 3 times a week. He had dinner with the children instead of locking himself in his office with work. He participated in the activities Rosemary proposed, even if he felt clumsy at first. On a Thursday he came home to find the boys in the kitchen, covered in flour from head to toe, trying to make bread with Rosemary. The kitchen looked like it had been hit by a hurricane, but the laughter echoing through the room was worth all the mess. "Dad, you have to knead the dough," Peter shouted, holding out his little hands full of sticky dough. Michael looked at the Italian suit he was wearing, then at the flour scattered everywhere, and made a decision. He took off his jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and joined the mess. For 2 hours he kneaded. Doe laughed at his sons' antics, listened to their stories of the day, and effectively participated in their lives. When the loaves were ready and the kitchen was clean, Michael realized he had experienced one of the happiest afternoons since Caroline's death. "How do you feel?" Rosemary asked as they organized the utensils. "Different," Michael replied. "Lighter somehow." "That's how they feel every day when you participate in their lives," she said. "That's what they want from you. Not expensive gifts or international trips, they want your presence." That night, after the children were asleep, Michael realized that Rosemary had become much more than an employee. She had become a bridge between him and his own sons, a living example of how it's possible to transform pain into care, loss into love. But he also realized something that made him uneasy. He had started to depend on her presence. His sons had become attached to Rosemary in a way that, while beautiful, was also worrying. What if she decided to leave? What if she found something better? What if her mother got sick and she had to go back to her hometown? These questions kept him awake that night, but the next day when he came down for breakfast and once again found that scene of domestic harmony, he decided it was worth the risk. It was worth trusting. It was worth allowing himself to believe that some people come into our lives at the right time, in the right way, to teach us exactly what we need to learn. Rosemary Evans had come to clean the house, but she was cleaning much more than furniture and floors. She was cleaning wounds, healing scars, rebuilding bridges that had seemed definitively broken. And for the first time since Caroline died, Michael began to believe that it was possible to be a family again. A different family from the one they had before, but a family nonetheless. United not just by blood or circumstances, but by everyday love, by constant presence, by the daily choice to stay and care for one another. The following weeks passed like a sweet dream from which Michael did not want to wake. The house had transformed into a real home. The once silent corridors now echoed with genuine laughter. The kitchen, which for months had been just a functional space, became the heart of the house where small everyday miracles happened. Gabriel had become a little gardener, tending to the seedlings he had planted with rosemary, with the dedication of a scientist. Lucas discovered his passion for cooking and spent hours planning recipes he could make on the weekend. Peter, the youngest, developed the habit of waking up early to help Rosemary with breakfast, humming songs she had taught him. Michael, for his part, was learning a new language, the language of presence. He started coming home earlier, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to be part of his sons' lives. He discovered that listening to a 6-year-old's daily adventures could be as engrossing as a board meeting. He learned that helping with homework was not just supervision, but an opportunity to understand how his sons thought, dreamed, and processed the world around them. But every transformation meets resistance, and the resistance came in the form of Helena Ashford Montgomery, Michael's mother. Helena was a 65-year-old woman, elegant, accustomed to the most refined social circles of New York City. A widow for 10 years, she had dedicated her life to maintaining the prestige of the Ashford Montgomery family and ensuring that traditions were preserved. For Helena, every choice was a reflection of family status, every decision a public statement about who they were in society. She had been a demanding mother-in-law to Caroline, always finding subtle ways to criticize her daughter-in-law's choices. When Caroline died, Helena naturally assumed the role of supervising her grandchildren's upbringing, visiting the house regularly, and opining on everything from the school they attended to the clothes they wore. On a Thursday morning, Helena arrived at the house unannounced, as was her custom. Michael was at the office, but the children were home because the school had cancelled classes due to a plumbing issue. Rosemary was with the boys in the living room, helping Gabriel with a science project while Lucas and Peter drew on the floor. "Good morning," Helena said, entering the room with the authority of someone who felt she owned the place. "Grandma Helena," the children shouted in unison, running to hug her. Rosemary stood up immediately, smoothing her uniform and quickly trying to organize the materials scattered on the floor. "Good morning, Mom," Rosemary greeted respectfully. Helena surveyed the scene with critical eyes. The craft supplies spread across the living room, the children with their clothes slightly smudged with paint, the relaxed atmosphere that contrasted with the formality she considered appropriate. "And you are?" Helena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Rosemary Evans, Mom. I work here, taking care of the house and the children." "I see," Helena said, with a tone that carried more information than the words themselves expressed. During her visit, Helena observed every interaction between Rosemary and the children. She noted the familiarity with which they addressed her, calling her Auntie Rose. She noticed the naturalness with which Rosemary participated in their games, the way the children sought her approval for their small achievements, the way they snuggled close to her during the story she read. When Michael arrived from work, he found his mother in the living room, sipping tea while watching the children play in the garden with Rosemary. "Mother, what a pleasant surprise," he said, kissing Helena's cheek. "How are you?" "Worried," she replied directly. "Worried about what?" Helena pointed discreetly towards the garden, where Rosemary was teaching Peter how to plant sunflower seeds. "About this, Michael, about this situation that has developed here." "What situation?" "Don't you see? This woman is taking on a role that isn't hers. The children are getting too attached, creating an inappropriate emotional dependency." Michael felt an immediate irritation, but tried to remain calm. "Mother, Rosemary is an excellent professional. The children are well, happy." "Michael, I raised you. I know when something is not up to our family's standards," Helena interrupted. "This woman has no proper training to care for children. She doesn't have the right references. We don't know her history, her family, her background." "I do," Michael said firmly. "I know everything I need to know." "Do you?" Helena raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Do you know her criminal record? Do you know if she has any addictions, financial problems that could compromise the children's safety? Do you know if she isn't using her proximity to you to gain advantages?" "Mother, you're exaggerating." "I'm being realistic," Helena retorted. Michael, you are emotionally vulnerable. It's natural for you to get attached to the first person who shows care for the children, but you need to think with your head, not your heart. Helena stood up and walked to the window overlooking the garden. Look at them, she said. See how your children look at this woman. They are replacing their mother's memory. With this employee. They're not replacing anyone, Michael said, his anger growing. No? Peter called me Grandma Helena today. Do you know how long it's been since he did that? He always just called me Grandma. But now he needs to differentiate me from Auntie Rose, doesn't he? She is occupying a space that is not hers. Michael fell silent, watching his sons in the garden. Helena had touched a raw nerve. He himself had noticed how the children referred to Rosemary with an intimacy that sometimes bothered him. Not out of jealousy, but out of an insecurity he couldn't name. Besides, Helena continued, what kind of example are you setting for them? That anyone can just enter our family without criteria, without standards. Gabriel is growing up, Michael. Soon he will question why a housekeeper has authority over him. How will you explain this confusion of hierarchies? It's not a confusion, Michael said, but his voice was less firm. Michael, I understand that you're suffering. I understand that you need help with the children. But there are appropriate ways to do this. We can hire a qualified governess with a degree in education or psychology, someone who understands the proper protocols for a family of our standing. Helena approached her son and placed a hand on his shoulder. Son, you are confusing gratitude with necessity. You are confusing convenience with appropriateness. This woman may be very good at what she does, but she is not suitable for the upbringing of my grandchildren. Michael sank heavily into the armchair, feeling the weight of his mother's words. Part of him recognized that there was some truth in what she was saying. Rosemary had become much more than an employee, and perhaps that wasn't entirely healthy. What do you suggest? He asked, though he already feared the answer. That you be a responsible father and make a mature decision, Helena replied. Dismiss this woman respectfully, and let's find someone suitable to care for the children. Someone with training, references, and a background compatible with our family. That night, after the children were asleep and Rosemary had left, Michael was alone with his doubts. His mother's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the guilt and uncertainty he had carried since Caroline's death. Was he being irresponsible? Was his emotional neediness clouding his judgment? Was he exposing his sons to unnecessary risks by trusting someone he had known for such a short time? The next morning, Michael woke up with a decision that made him nauseous, but that his reason insisted was the right one. He waited until the children had left for school and called Rosemary to talk. Rosemary, I need to speak with you, he said, noticing how she immediately sensed the gravity in his tone. Of course, Michael. Is something wrong? He took a deep breath, gathering the courage for the words he didn't want to say. I need to rethink our situation here, he began. The children have become very attached to you, more than is appropriate. Rosemary stood motionless, but Michael saw something extinguish in her eyes. I understand, she said simply. It's nothing you've done wrong, Michael hurried to explain. You're wonderful with them, it's just that maybe I've let things go too far. Too far, Rosemary repeated, and there was a deep sadness in her voice. The children need to understand hierarchies, boundaries. They need to learn that not everyone stays forever. I can't create unrealistic expectations. Rosemary nodded slowly, absorbing each word like a physical blow. When would you like me to leave, sir? She asked, reverting to the formal address. At the end of the week, Michael said, hating every word that came out of his mouth. And the children? How will you explain it to them? Michael hadn't thought about that. In fact, he had tried not to think about how Gabriel, Lucas, and Peter would react to Rosemary's departure. I'll figure something out, he said, without conviction. Rosemary stood up, smoothing her uniform with hands that trembled slightly. Michael, she said, looking directly into his eyes, may I offer a piece of advice? He nodded. Don't let the fear of getting hurt stop you from loving, not you and not your sons. And with those words she withdrew to finish her last day of work. For the rest of the week, Michael observed a gradual change in the children's behavior. They seemed to sense that something was different, although Rosemary maintained her normal routine. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something important was about to be lost. Gabriel, the most observant, was the first to question it. "Dad, is Auntie Rose sad about something?" he asked during dinner on Thursday. "Why do you think that?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "She smiled less today, and she sang fewer songs." Lucas agreed. "And she hugged us more than usual, like she was saying goodbye." Peter, with the typical intuition of young children, got straight to the point. "Is Auntie Rose leaving, Daddy?" Michael felt his world crumble as he saw the eyes of his 3 sons fixed on him, waiting for an answer he didn't know how to give. "Sometimes people need to follow different paths," he said lamely. The silence that followed was deafening. Gabriel pushed his plate away, having completely lost his appetite. Lucas began to nervously fidget with his napkin. Peter simply started to cry. "I don't want her to leave," Peter said between sobs. "She's part of our family." "No, she's not," Michael said, harsher than he intended. "Rosemary is an employee, and employees don't stay forever." Gabriel looked at his father with an expression of hurt that Michael would never forget. "Just like Mom didn't stay forever?" the 8-year-old boy asked. The question hit Michael like a gunshot. He realized too late that by removing Rosemary from his sons' lives, he was repeating the pattern of loss they so feared. He was confirming that the people they loved simply disappeared without proper explanation, leaving only emptiness and confusion. On Friday, Rosemary's last day at the house, she woke up earlier than usual and prepared a special breakfast for the children. Heart-shaped pancakes, orange juice with little paper umbrellas, fruit cut into fun shapes. When the children came downstairs and saw the table, they knew immediately it was a farewell. Gabriel approached Rosemary and, with the seriousness of an adult, asked, "Are you coming back?" Rosemary knelt to his level, looking directly into his eyes. "I will carry you in my heart wherever I go," she said. "And you can always find me in the things we learned together, in the garden we planted, in the recipes we cooked, in the stories I told." Lucas and Peter joined the hug, and the 4 of them stood there, embraced in the kitchen, trying to capture a moment they knew was coming to an end. Michael watched from a distance, feeling simultaneously like a monster and a responsible father. Was he doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, or the wrong thing for the right reasons? He no longer knew. When it was time for Rosemary to leave, she left little notes on the children's pillows. Notes with messages of love, encouragement, and the promise that true love never completely disappears. And she walked out the front door, carrying only a small suitcase and the certainty that she was leaving behind 3 children she had learned to love as her own, and a man who was making the mistake of his life for fear of making an even bigger one. Monday arrived like a grey day, heavy with regret. The house woke up different, as if even the walls felt Rosemary's absence. Breakfast was silent, served by the new employee Helena had found in record time. An efficient woman with an impeccable resume and references that met all the criteria of New York's high society. But she didn't know that Gabriel liked his scrambled eggs with a pinch of oregano. She didn't know that Lucas needed exactly 4 ice cubes in his orange juice. She didn't know that Peter ate better when his food was served on colorful plates. And most importantly, she didn't know how to fill the emotional void that had settled in that house. Gabriel refused to eat breakfast. He sat at the table, looked at the plate of perfectly arranged food, and simply said he wasn't hungry. Lucas ate in silence, mechanically, as if the food had no taste. Peter asked 3 times where Auntie Rose was, and with each, "She doesn't work here anymore," he heard, his eyes filled with more tears. Michael watched all of this with a tightness in his chest that grew with each passing minute. He tried to cheer the children up by talking about the weekend, about outings they could take, about gifts they could buy, but the responses were monosyllabic, their gazes distant. When the children left for school, Michael was left alone with his thoughts. The house was impeccable. The new employee was extremely competent, but there was a coldness in the air, an absence of life that he couldn't ignore. At the office, he tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning home. How were the children at school? How had they slept the night before? Had Gabriel found Rosemary's note? Had Peter stopped looking for her in the hallways? Helena showed up at the company in the afternoon with that satisfied smile of someone who had solved an important problem. "How are the children with the new employee?" she asked, sitting in the armchair across from Michael's desk. "Fine," he lied. "I told you it would be better this way. Margaret has 15 years of experience with top-tier families. She speaks 3 languages, has first aid training, knows how to drive. She's exactly what you need." Michael nodded, but his words came out without conviction. "Yes, she seems competent." "Michael, you made the right decision," Helena said, sensing her son's hesitation. "In a few weeks, the children won't even remember this previous situation." But Helena was wrong. The children didn't forget. In the following weeks, they seemed to wilt like plants without water. Gabriel reverted to that expression that was too serious for his age. Lucas returned to the silence that had characterized the first few months after his mother's death. Peter developed a habit of hiding under the kitchen table, as if he were looking for someone he couldn't find. The garden that Rosemary had helped Gabriel plant began to wither from neglect. The recipe book Lucas had been developing was abandoned in a drawer. Peter stopped drawing and started wetting the bed again, a behavior he had overcome months before. Michael tried to compensate for the absence by being more present, but he realized that his presence alone was not enough. There was a specific kind of care that Rosemary offered, a particular way of loving that he couldn't replicate, no matter how hard he tried. One morning, 3 weeks after Rosemary's departure, Michael came down for breakfast and found Peter sitting alone in the kitchen, holding one of the drawings he had made for Rosemary. "Daddy," the 4-year-old said with a seriousness that broke Michael's heart, "why do the people we love always leave?" The question echoed through the kitchen like a cry of pain. Michael knelt to his son's level, looking directly into his tear-filled eyes. "Not everyone leaves, son." "Mommy did," Peter said. "Auntie Rose did. Who's next?" In that moment, Michael fully understood the mistake he had made. By taking Rosemary out of his son's lives, for fear they would get too attached, he had confirmed their greatest fear, that love was temporary, that important people always left without a proper explanation. Gabriel appeared in the kitchen at that moment, still in his pajamas, his eyes swollen from crying during the night. "Dad," he said, "I dreamed about Auntie Rose last night. She was in the garden, tending to the plants, singing that song she always used to sing." Lucas came down shortly after, also dejected, carrying the recipe book he had abandoned. "Daddy, do you think Auntie Rose is okay?" Lucas asked. "Do you think she found another family to take care of?" The thought of Rosemary caring for other children, offering to others the love his son so desperately needed, was like a stab to Michael's heart. "Dad," Gabriel said with that precocious maturity he had developed since his mother's death, "did you send Auntie Rose away because she wasn't important enough for our family?" "No," Michael said quickly. "That wasn't why." "Then why was it?" Gabriel insisted. "Did she do something wrong? Did she hurt us in some way?" Michael looked at his 3 sons, all there in the kitchen, waiting for an explanation he didn't know how to give. How could he explain that he had sent away the person who had offered them the most love in recent years because of social pressures? How could he explain that he had chosen what was appropriate over what was necessary? "She did nothing wrong," he finally admitted. "Nothing at all." "Then why can't she come back?" Peter asked with the simple logic of a child. Michael was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at his 3 sons and made a decision that would change everything. "Do you want her to come back?" he asked. All 3 responded simultaneously, with more energy than they had shown in weeks. "Yes." "Then let's go get her," Michael said. The next hour was a whirlwind. Michael cancelled all his appointments for the day, asked his secretary to reschedule the week's meetings. While the children got ready, he called the agency that had hired Rosemary, trying to get information about where she was. "Sir, the employee hasn't found a new placement yet," the attendant informed him. "She went back to her hometown upstate." "Where exactly?" Michael asked, already jotting down the information. "Kingston, New York. She left her mother's address as a reference." Michael called the children, who came running down, their backpacks on and their eyes shining with anticipation. "We're going on a trip," he said. "A trip to get someone very important." The drive to Kingston took several hours, with stops for food, gas, and for the children to rest. During the journey, Michael had time to reflect on everything that had happened. He thought about his mother's words, the social pressures, the concepts of appropriateness that he had allowed to dictate his choices. But mostly he thought about Rosemary, about how she had come into their lives at the right time, offering exactly what they needed: constant presence, unconditional love, the certainty that someone would stay even when things got tough. The children slept for much of the trip, exhausted by the day's excitement. But whenever they woke up, they would ask if they were there yet, if they would see Auntie Rose again soon. They arrived in Kingston late on Saturday afternoon. The historic city, with its colonial architecture and stone streets, contrasted dramatically with the metropolis they had left behind. Michael followed the address he had written down and found a simple but well-kept house on a quiet street in the historic district. A woman with white hair and a welcoming smile answered the door. "Good afternoon," Michael said. "We're looking for Rosemary Evans." The woman, who was clearly Rosemary's mother, looked at Michael and then at the three children, hiding behind him. "You're the family from the city," she said, not as a question but as a statement. "Rose spoke a lot about you." "Where is she?" Gabriel asked, stepping forward. "At church," the woman replied, pointing to the top of a hill where the bell tower of a colonial church was visible. "She always goes to the 6 o'clock mass when she's sad." Michael thanked her, and they headed to the church. The walk along the stone streets was silent, each lost in their own thoughts and expectations. St. Francis Church was full for the evening mass. Michael and the children entered discreetly and looked for Rosemary among the congregation. Gabriel was the first to spot her, sitting in one of the middle pews, her head bowed in prayer. Unable to contain himself, Gabriel shouted, "Auntie Rose!" The name echoed through the church, causing several people to turn around. Rosemary lifted her head, confused, searching for the source of the voice. When she saw Gabriel running down the central aisle, followed by Lucas and Peter, Rosemary stood up instantly, her eyes filling with tears. "My boys!" she exclaimed, opening her arms to receive them. The reunion was intense, emotional, filled with relief and joy. The children clung to Rosemary as if they feared she might disappear again. She hugged them tightly, kissing each of their heads, murmuring words of love and longing. Michael approached slowly, watching the scene with a heart tight with emotion and regret. "Rosemary," he said when he finally got close. She looked up, still embracing the children, and looked at him with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Michael," she said simply. "I made a mistake," he said directly, without beating around the bush. "A terrible mistake. Daddy sent us away to come get, for you," Peter explained with the typical honesty of children. "We drove for hours and hours," Lucas added. "And I brought this for you," Gabriel said, handing Rosemary a crumpled drawing he had made during the trip. It was a drawing of the family: Michael, Gabriel, Lucas, Peter, and right in the center, Rosemary. Rosemary looked at the drawing, and tears streamed freely down her face. "Rosemary," Michael said, "I don't know exactly what you are to us, whether you're an employee or family or a guardian angel, but I know that we're not whole without you." He took a deep breath, gathering the courage for the words that needed to be said. "I know I made a mistake by letting fears and social pressures dictate my decision. I know I hurt you, and most importantly, I hurt my sons. But if you give us a second chance, I promise I will never again let anyone determine who is or isn't part of our family." Rosemary looked at him, then at the children, then back at him. "You were the answer to my prayers," she said. "When my world fell apart, God sent you to me to show me that there was still love to give and receive." "So you'll come back?" Peter asked, his eyes shining with anticipation. "I'll come back," Rosemary said, "but not as an employee, as family." The journey back was completely different from the trip there. The children talked for hours, telling Rosemary everything that had happened in the weeks she was away. They talked about the withered garden, the abandoned recipe book, how the house had become quiet and cold. Rosemary listened to everything attentively, asking questions, showing genuine interest in every detail, and she promised that together they would rebuild everything that had been lost. When they arrived in New York City on Sunday night, Helena was waiting for them at the house. Michael had called during the trip to explain what had happened. "Mother," Michael said, before even getting out of the car, "I want to officially introduce a member of our family, Rosemary Evans." Helena looked at Rosemary, then at her grandchildren who were running excitedly around her, then at her son who looked happier than she had seen him in years. "Rosemary," Helena said, approaching slowly, I would like to apologize." Rosemary looked at her in surprise. "I was wrong," Helena continued. "I was so worried about what was appropriate that I forgot what was necessary. I was so focused on protecting the family that I almost destroyed what was left of it." Helena took a deep breath, mustering the courage for words that were hard to say. "You brought life back into this house. You brought joy back to my grandchildren, and I almost ruined it out of sheer prejudice." Rosemary approached Helena and, to everyone's surprise, hugged her. "We all make mistakes when we're trying to protect the ones we love," Rosemary said gently. "The important thing is to recognize and correct them." In the months that followed, the house transformed again, but this time the transformation was deeper, more conscious. Michael learned to balance work and family in a real way, not just cosmetically. Helena started visiting more regularly, but to participate and support, not to supervise and control. The garden was replanted, larger and more diverse. The recipe book was resumed, now including traditional upstate dishes that Rosemary taught them. Peter started drawing again, creating a family album that included all the special moments they lived together. Rosemary brought her children, Rachel and John, to meet their new family in the city. It was an emotional meeting, full of shared stories and plans for the future. On Christmas Eve that year, after a full day of preparing for the holiday feast, preparations that involved the entire family, including Helena, Michael gathered everyone in the living room. "I have an important question to ask," he said, looking directly at Rosemary. The children fell silent, sensing the solemnity of the moment. "Rosemary," Michael said, "will you stay with us forever? Officially as family?" Rosemary looked around the room, seeing the expectant faces of the children, Helena's encouraging smile, and Michael's eyes full of hope. "Yes," she said simply, "I want to stay forever." What followed was a group hug, tears of joy, and plans for the future being made simultaneously by everyone. That night, while the children slept and Helena had gone home, Michael and Rosemary sat on the porch watching the stars in the summer sky. "Thank you," Michael said. "For what?" Rosemary asked. "For not giving up on us, for coming back even after everything." "Michael," Rosemary said, "family isn't about blood or contracts or social standing. It's about choosing to stay. It's about choosing to love, every day, even when it's hard." She paused, looking at the lit-up house where 3 children slept peacefully. "And you were the family I chose. Not because it was convenient or easy, but because true love recognizes true love." Years later, when Gabriel graduated from high school, Lucas discovered his calling in gastronomy, and Peter became a talented artist. They all credited much of who they became to the constant presence of Rosemary in their lives. They learned that family is a daily choice, that love is presence, that some people come into our lives not to fill empty spaces, but to teach us that we were never really empty, just waiting for the right moment to bloom. And so, dear listeners, ends the story of Michael, Gabriel, Lucas, Peter, and Rosemary, a family born not of blood, but of the decision to love and to remain. If this story touched your heart, if you recognized yourself in the pain of loss or the hope of a new beginning, leave your like down below and subscribe to our channel. We want to know in the comments, which moment in this story touched you the most? Have you ever had the experience of finding family where you least expected it? Share with us, because every story of love and overcoming deserves to be celebrated. Every day, here on the channel, we bring narratives that reveal the deepest and truest side of the human experience. Stories that remind us that even in the most difficult times, there is always a light waiting to guide us back to love. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that goes straight to the heart.